Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our today's webinar, Making Your Supply Chain Sustainable, Key Principles for the Global Good. My name is Estelle Levinelli. I'm the CEO and founder of a social enterprise called Levin Sources, which helps industry, governments and civil society build mineral supply chains and sectors that are sustainable, valuable and equitable. I'm also a judge for the Global Good Awards, and I'm really delighted to be your host here today. So the webinar has been arranged by the Global Good Awards to raise awareness of sustainable supply chains and how important they are to driving global change for sustainability. But we also want to encourage you to apply to the awards, and in particular to the Sustainable Supply Chains category. So do click on the link to the Global Good Awards that my colleague Ellis at Alchemists will kindly share in the chat, and scan and take a look at that later today, please. So in a recent BBC Food programme on eco-labelling, Nestlé quoted that nearly 2/3 of its environmental footprint comes from its sourcing ingredients. We also heard a couple of weeks ago that 1 in 5 UK retailers cancelled contracts last year worth £7 billion in total with suppliers who had fallen short on ethical and sustainable standards. And work by McKinsey suggests that up to 90% of a company's impact on air, land, water, biodiversity and geological resources occurs within its supply chains. That tells us that by working on our supply chains, by communicating our sustainability expectations clearly, by holding suppliers to account and supporting and motivating them to improve their practices, our impacts can be huge. But how do we maximize this opportunity? How do we do this well? At the Global Good Awards, we've worked on what we believe are some key principles that your business can follow to make your supply chain as sustainable as possible. You should have received an email in advance of the meeting, and you can also find them in the chat in the handout section. So if you click on that, you can download the PDF and take a look, and please use that to orient yourself during today's webinar. Just some technical notes before I introduce you to our panelists. Apart from the PDF handout, there will be a question and answer session later. So do please feel free during the course of the webinar to put your questions into the question box. And at the very end, we'll have a poll on some of the principles to find out what else you would like to have webinars about or learn about. So first, let me turn to our panelists. On our panel today, we have an esteemed group of individuals who've been taking radical action to improve their own and others' supply chains, and it's a real honour to have each of them here, actually. So I'm going to ask Monique, Mark and David to please introduce themselves and say something about their institution, why they're a leader in building sustainable supply chains. Mark, maybe we could start with you.
Morning, Estelle. Thank you, everybody. Delighted to be here. Mark Yankovic, founder and CEO of Delphus Eco. If you come into my office, there's a massive sign on the wall that says "Be green at every stage," and it's a mantra that we have throughout the entire business and everybody that works here. So, in the leadership piece, one of the things that I'm super proud of is a few years ago we pioneered the use of recycling plastic, UK plastic in the UK, which was relatively unique, and then we pioneered the fact that we've now got 100% recycled plastic in 100% of our bottles, which we think is unique globally. So under leadership, that's quite a big achievement from our side.
Mark, thanks so much. Monique.
Yes, hi. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. My name is Monique Lempers, and I'm Director Impact Innovation at Fairphone. And Fairphone is a smartphone company and social enterprise based in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. And yeah, we bring to the market, we claim the most sustainable and ethical phone that you can buy. We actually started as an awareness-raising campaign about 10 years ago on conflict minerals, so the minerals that are used in the making of a phone, which are over 50, and part of that are extracted in mines in conflict areas such as DRC. And we started as an awareness-raising campaign to raise awareness on the fact that actually these minerals are in the phone that you use on a daily basis. And yeah, along the way, we wanted to not only raise awareness, but also show that that you can actually do something about it and work within the system and within the business to change things and to make our phone actually and our the users of the phone a change agent. And that is what we've done over the last 10 years. When we started in 2014 to bring the first Fairphone 1 to the market, and we are now at the Fairphone 4. And yeah, we're really proud of what we have been able to accomplish with all our partners and suppliers so far on different levels of impact with regards to fair materials, where we started, but also manufacturing and e-waste, take back, and modular design, repairability.
Monique, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
David.
Thanks, Estelle. Yeah, good morning, team. I'm David Pixon. I'm the Senior Vice President of Sustainability and ESG here at Alchemists. I'm also a Global Good Awards judge this year. Very much looking forward to the competition, some great entries. I'm a former Chief Sustainability Officer, managed to secure the Queen's Award for Sustainable Development and also got a chance to go to the UN and brief them on the Sustainable Development Goals when they were being formed. But I've also been a supply chain director, sat on both sides of the buyer-supplier relationship. So I know that there are tensions on either side of the sort of table, if you will, and challenges there. But here at Alchemists, we are focused on risk management. We're working with clients to build data visibility across ESG programs and across supply chain compliance. We're a risk management technology company, so we do software and services. We focus on probably 2 or 3 overlapping circles, particularly supply chain compliance, so areas where making sure you're working with the right people. The ESG aspects of that, the safer, healthier, more responsible workplaces, and then what we call the EHSQ, so areas like chemical management, quality, and specific certification to ISO standards. And with all of that, one of the products we've just brought to market over the last year or so is a set of modules that bring together ESG and bring that data visibility, not only within organizations, but across such complex supply chains as well. So why we think we are leading in terms of building supply chain compliance really is that we help folks to get that data visibility and one true view of what's happening across phenomenally complex boundaries. We've also got quite a lot of power from the network effect. So we're working with almost 50,000 companies across the globe, and they probably form 2 broad circles. You've got the enterprise top-level clients on one hand, and their complex supply chains on the other. So that network effect brings that together, and all of it, as we say, backed up by international standards like ISO certifications.
David, thanks also for joining us. Brilliant to have you with us. So let me dive into some of our principles and my questions for the panel. The way we're going to run this is I will group certain principles together and we'll have some exploration of them. There's a lot of principles, and in an ideal world, we'd have had a couple of hours to go into every single one of them in detail. But we're all busy people, as you are, and decided that an hour would be enough to give you a flavour and get you interested. So what we're going to cover now is on being ESG comprehensive, which means respecting human rights, cultural heritage, and nature. So principles 1, 2, and 3 in sustainable supply chains, companies respect human rights today and tomorrow. They value nature intrinsically for the sake of itself, not just for the way that it's useful to humanity. And that companies consider cultural as well as environmental heritage. And ultimately that sustainable supply chains are comprehensive, considering the ESG and economic impacts holistically. So David, in our conversations, you've spoken about the importance of an ESG-rich environment. What does that mean?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Estelle. I think where I usually start in the work we're doing with clients is to start with the concept of materiality. So, of course, every company's or organization or business's supply chain is going to be different, but what really matters is what matters within those supply chains. So what are the factors that are most significant and most material, if you like? So having identified those, some of which will be common, things like carbon footprinting or so on, waste management, but other areas might rise more to the fore, if you like. So the first thing is to assess what matters within those supply chains and what you really need to be tackling. But the second point then is to be able to do what I call the 3 CBs, which is to set a challenging balance that changes behaviours for commercial benefit. So challenging balance, changing behaviours for commercial benefit, because I think it's very often in the ESG rich environment to get a little bit blindsided, perhaps to end up with a focus on just carbon, for example, but you really do need that challenging balance, that full spread across the 3 pillars, particularly when it comes to supply chain issues. Now, we were at COP26, we were up in Glasgow last year, and it was a phenomenal event, and a lot was achieved despite what perhaps may have been written up in certain corners, really. So it was a big step forward, but as a result, there was a huge focus on climate action, of course, but it's not the only show in town. There are other aspects of the environment that really matter, again, things like waste management, water management, biodiversity development, so on. So it's important to have a balance across the E pillar. But when I was CSO, I think one of the things I found myself explaining more often than not, particularly in working with our supply chain, we had a phenomenally complex supply chain in the construction world across 3 or 4 different continents, really. So it really was a complex piece of work. But it was really important to recognise that as much as you should be focusing on the environment, you should also look for the social pillars, areas like supply chain diversity, skills development, and I can say a little bit more about that later on if that helps. Social value, the way in which those companies, their organisations and governments come to have an impact, hopefully a positive one, on their communities around them, and quite simply safety and well-being, of course, the safety and well-being of the people that are in those supply chains. So real social factors that help to drive, just as importantly as the environmental focus. But the final point, G, is probably where it's come most to life, I think, particularly in the supply chain context. The G, the governance piece. We've been focused on anti-bribery for a number of years, driving ethical sourcing practices, and I know Monique will probably say a lot more about that. But we've also been looking at more of a rounded assessment of the impacts, really, across that governance to make sure that supply chains are run well, which then starts to delve into areas like modern slavery. So obviously there's been a UK Modern Slavery Act since 2015 to make sure that there are no instances across all the tiers of a supply chain as it starts to get more and more complex down through the layers, where people are working in unsafe areas or unsafe working practice or even abusive working practices. And sadly, it's a very common situation in the modern world, which seems very difficult to accept. So it's important to understand that audits, checks, relationships, engagements are happening to edit that out and to make sure you work with suppliers to make sure that's not happening. And then finally, of course, in the modern world as well, cyber security is a really significant issue, and making sure you've got the right standards and levels of data protection as well. So what we mean by an ESG-rich environment, I think, is just making sure you've got that challenging balance across the 3 pillars. It needs to change behaviour, so things need to be done differently as a result, but it must come back to a business case that helps to drive forward both the supplier's performance and the top-level clients as well.
David, thanks. That's a really, really lovely way to set up the whole webinar, actually, with that diversity explained. But Monique, one word that they didn't use, but that is to me because it's human rights. And sometimes the human rights and ESG worlds don't quite come together, but I believe they should. So what have human rights got to do with sustainable supply chains? Why does Fairphone monitor and manage its human rights risks and impacts? And what benefit has this brought you and your stakeholders?
Yeah, I think the human rights have a lot to do with supply chains. I mean, the products that we use on a daily basis, like a smartphone, they have gone through thousands of hands. Starting with the people, when you look at a phone, that extracts the over 50 minerals that come from mines. Sometimes they do that with their bare hands, with the danger of collapsing tunnels, and then up to the people that work on the production line that sometimes also work in extreme long hours, receive poor wages. So that is the reality that unfortunately is still there in many places across the world, and therefore also in our supply chains, where people are not protected from human rights violations or sometimes even being exploited. And I think it is therefore our responsibility as a manufacturer to, on the one hand, try to avoid such risks, obviously, but at the same time, we also know that they're not only risks, they are happening. And we really believe that it starts with acknowledging that these big issues are there and sometimes have systemic causes, root causes, that you can't just change overnight, or that you also can't change with only risk management or with audits. And therefore, we want to also really engage with our supply chain and see where we can collaborate and have partners that also see these challenges and want to find solutions together with us. And that means that we need to engage, we need to build coalitions through the supply chain with those actors that can really make change happen, because we are only small, we don't have such leverage always. And that has brought us some amazing results, actually, from which people have benefited with, for example, living wages, or have received better protection as a consequence of that.
Excellent. And you referenced coalitions and partnership building, and actually that's going to be our next section. That's a really important piece of respecting human rights, is knowing how and when to use your leverage. But Mark, let's speak about the environment. Eco is in your name. So what is Delphus's commitment to nature for the sake of itself?
Well, in my previous life, I was a banker for my sins, and the aha moment for me was when I was on holiday with my family, and I saw this cleaner with a bucket of soap suds, dirty water, and they poured it into the drain that then ran next to my feet and went straight into the sea, where I've just been swimming. And I thought, this just can't be good. And went back to my job and sat at my desk and started Googling cleaning products and went, these things are all pretty nasty, and the impact on the environment is dramatic, but nobody is talking about it. So I went, well, if not me, then who? And I'm going to give up my job, and I'm going to commit myself to actually trying to make a change. So in 2007 till today, I've been driving every single formulation we make starts with aquatic organisms and the least possible impact on aquatic organisms. So we start with that as the base formulation, and we build it up. And it has to have the least possible impact on the environment. And then, funnily enough, that actually has a reduced impact on the humans that use the cleaning products as well. So net those two work together. And then you build on top of that, and you go, okay, well, how am I packaging this? Where are my suppliers coming from? What are their social value principles? Are they embedded in a net zero journey? And then it's kind of layering all of those things together. And I think we're in the climate decade. We know this. The IPCC report came out yesterday. There are some incredible graphs just talking about if we go above 1.5 degrees from an environmental perspective, we're in a really bad place. And every single person has to rethink their supply chain and has to work with guys that really understand and want to get to that net zero journey.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder, but I think that brings us to, I guess, the importance of partnership, doesn't it? And working together, because the challenges are so huge. And as Monique said, there are root causes, and individual businesses can't be expected to solve a root cause alone, but they can contribute to that. So let's think about partnership and leverage. So principle 5 is, in sustainable supply chains, companies partner and use their leverage to influence business partners and other stakeholders to make the changes necessary to make the chain more sustainable. So Mark, coming back to you, who's the most inspiring organization you've partnered with, and how did that partnership benefit your business? How did it change how you do business?
It's a good question. I mean, I as they say, I've kissed a lot of frogs. I've kicked a lot of stones. My toes are all broken, trying to find partners that have the same ethos. And I eventually sat down and I wrote a supply chain charter, which is on our website, and it's open source document, which I've gone, these are my principles, and I really want everybody that works with me to believe in these principles. And we're a long-term, we want to work really, really closely with our supplier partners. But they have to have the same set of principles. But so in the example of, finding the prince, there are actually two examples that are slightly different. The one is C Corp, who are a B Corp, and I think they've got the highest ranking for in the printing space. And printing is traditionally a very, very chemical heavy, very, very bad VOC, i.e. they off gas a huge amount of fumes, dreadful place to work. These guys have invented a chemical-free printing process, and it's a waterless printing process. It is amazing, and it's super forward-thinking. And the fact that they're in their own world of doing something that is quite traumatic and quite disruptive just gave me confidence to keep going and go, do you know what, actually there are other people that are doing this. And in a similar vein, First Mile, who are waste collectors, that's also a totally unloved, uninvested, difficult environment, and they have managed to go, do you know what, we're going to do waste collecting differently, and we are going to recycle pretty much everything that we collect. And they've done the most phenomenal job, and our exemplars, and both of them are in pretty mucky businesses, have proved that you can actually make them a whole lot better. So they are hugely inspiring for guys like us to go, actually keep going. There are people that are out there that are doing this.
That's awesome. Monique, you mentioned before that Fairphone is a small player, but you have a big brand, especially in the policy arena, where we've walked the same halls for a decade, I think. So your commitment to sustainable business was at the very heart of your founding and is at the heart of your company's purpose. Can you tell us about when you've encountered a prominent or a salient risk in your supply chain that you've been too small to influence alone, but how you then used your leverage to make the change, or you built leverage to make the change?
Yeah, there are many examples, because I think if I really look back, there are few moments where we wanted to address risks or find solutions to the challenges that we encounter. We always partner, or always need to partner. It's almost never done by ourselves. We simply don't have that leverage. And as I said, for systemic problems, you also need a systemic solution, which often encounters or needs to involve different players in the system. There are several examples. I think when we started, indeed, about 10 years ago, it was the Dodd-Frank Act just came in, which meant that there was companies were asked to publicly report on and track and trace where they were sourcing minerals from, and it couldn't be from conflict areas, which was DRC and the surrounding countries, which came with the risk of that. All the communities that were depending on their incomes from mining were going to be from one day to another without income, because it was going to be a ban on any minerals from that area. And that is where we wanted to give the example of, well, you can still source conflict-free minerals, or tin in this case, from areas where people really need the income. And therefore the risky areas that now everyone was avoiding. So we collaborated there and joined the conflict-free tin initiative, which was at that time also supported by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, and Philips joined, Tata Steel joined, and we had the smartphone company that joined. And what we simply wanted to show was that it was still possible to set up a track and trace system that could guarantee no conflict minerals from an area that was identified as high risk. And for sure, it was not the only trigger that made that. After a while, there was this whole big system set up from which the industry could source from that risky area, but still very key for a lot of people, a lot of poor people. But it was definitely a critical one, I think, that we were able to give that example, and afterwards it scaled immensely, and we played an important role in that. And that is the type of role we try to do. We try to go there where it is risky, find scalable solutions with in collaboration with others, and then hope that the broader industry also picks it up or follows it. Yeah.
You made me think that we've got a principle missing, which is the importance of government, civil society as enablers of sustainable supply chains. Because our experience in the Great Lakes region of Africa, by our, I mean Fairphone, Level Sources and others who've worked there, is that this just couldn't have been possible without the millions and millions invested by European and North American governments in, and of course the Congolese government and all the countries, the adjoining countries themselves, investing in creating the conditions to make more responsible sourcing possible. So I think we should add that to our principles list. And on that point, audience, is there anything missing? Tell us, because we want to evolve this list into something that's really, truly useful. But David, your business, Alchemists, you sit at the middle of lots of different businesses. You connect them through data, through information. And that gives you actually a tremendous community that you can work with and through to drive change. So how does Alchemists help businesses use their leverage better?
Yeah, thanks, Estelle. It's absolutely spot on, as you say. It's that connection of data and sitting at the confluence of that, if you like, so that we sit through what I was mentioning earlier on, that network effect. Look at the UK example for consideration. We've got about 3,000 enterprise clients we're moving, or clients of different sizes that are connected to about 35,000 smaller suppliers. So you can see that the kind of context. And of course, there's a lot of overlaps within that as well. So a number of those suppliers will be supplying a number of the clients as well. So what we often hear from both sides is that it's phenomenally complex. It's very difficult to get one true view, if you like, and one way of building genuine partnerships. And what we're finding most often than not, if you like, is that those genuine partnerships are built out of data, real knowledge, built out of the intelligence and the analysis and the trends that data reveals. But of course, that data changes as well. So what they're needing to do effectively is to move away from what are quite often complex manual processes that might at best be on a spreadsheet or on an in-house system or some other means, quite often manual, to be fair. And so one of the products and solutions that evolved at Alchemist was a thing called Safe Contractor and Safe Supplier. And that's really focused on the principle of working with pre-verified and pre-qualified organizations. And those organizations, whether they're contractors or suppliers, are able to demonstrate in advance of trading, if you like, that they've got the right insurances, they've got the right pre-qualified confirmations, they have the financial stability, financial standing, insurances in place, as you mentioned earlier on, potentially some ISO certifications if that's appropriate, but they're operating to the right levels of data security, and they've got the right focus on environmental impacts, and perhaps they've even uploaded and published their modern slavery statement, for example. So all of those things, of course, will be at one time, a snapshot in time, but they will also change over time. And it may be that those suppliers in that mass are being asked the same sorts of questions time and time again by company after company. So of course, it's a distraction for them. And what we're finding works well is, in terms of your point about leverage, is that if those top level clients are issuing a mandate, if you like, saying that we take our supply chain governance so seriously that we only want to work with pre-verified and pre-qualified companies, they're issuing a mandate to say we would like you therefore to sign up to Safe Supplier or Safe Contractor, and make sure that you are a safe contractor, safe supplier organization, so that there's a benefit from the top level client. There's a huge benefit from the suppliers as well, who get a chance to demonstrate this once and then push it out there, and not having to repeat themselves over and over again. They can just use that as a confirmation that they are working to international best practice, whether it's 9001 for quality or 27001 for information management or 45001 for safety, of course, because quite often in a supply chain situation you can outsource an activity but not the accountability and the responsibility for it. So those top level clients, of course, are wanting to know that through the sort of mandates they would issue to work with only pre-qualified suppliers, they then take a chance to use all that data, everything that's generated in that busy world. And when it comes to a quarterly review or a biannual review or even just an annual review, they've got something specific to look at, and they can follow that trend and then develop it over time. And I think particularly where we've been over the last couple of years, we've been in such a disrupted time that's the only way we'll now move this and develop it forward over the next few years, is if you've got that kind of relationship based on knowledge and intelligence.
Yeah, and having an evidence basis for action, really, really important. Otherwise, you're kind of shooting into the dark.
Yeah.
Now, dear audience, you haven't asked us any questions yet. Please do. Don't be shy. So we'll be coming to your questions later, but I'd love to see them trickling in and see how we might be provoking you, or maybe you have a story to share about your own sustainable supply chains you want to pop into the chat and I can read out to highlight something. But I want to talk about SMEs, and I think a lot about SMEs because 11 Sources is one. We face our own capacity building, or capacity constraints, let's say, in our journey towards professionalizing and from the very, from the start. We're 12 years old now, so we're much more developed. But I also have worked a lot in the artisanal and small scale mining sector, where there's over 40 million artisanal miners globally, and many of whom just work in the most high risk conditions and are not really, their rights aren't really provided for by the state, they're not protected by the state, and it's really difficult for them to operate responsibly. Now that's kind of at the extreme end, but all along value chains you have SMEs with different abilities to be fully formalized and to operate in a way that is fully responsible, and they simply have to triage and choose. So if we push the boundaries too hard, though, like with the new EU environmental human rights due diligence law that's just being proposed, it's very likely that small businesses that can't jump as high will be excluded from responsible supply chain, further marginalizing them and making it difficult for them to come out of poverty, to professionalize and develop. So this is why this principle is very important to me personally, but I think from a global point of view, that sustainable supply chains are inclusive and they engage small producers, and those small producers aren't excluded from participation, and there is proactiveness to keep them engaged. But at the same time, sustainable supply chains are equitable, where we seek win-win trading relationships that bring mutual benefits sustainably to both trading partners. And of course, the fair trade movement is the movement that really pioneered this idea over 20 years ago. So Monique, you've made a commitment as Fairphone to source from artisanal and small-scale miners, even though they're a really tough provenance. So why was this important to you, and what have you done to ensure you're meaningfully including them in your supply chains?
Yeah, well, Estelle, I think you actually already.
Oh, sorry.
But no, perfect. I mean, I think it is exactly that. It is especially now also in the current days. What we see as projections in economic development, in population growth, but also in this transition to a more green economy, where especially had the electrical vehicles, the solar panels that we need, they require a lot of materials, a lot of minerals, a lot of metals, and the projections therefore are also that we won't see a decrease in mining, but we will see an increase in the coming 30 years, 40 years, up to 2060. At least a doubling of the demand in the broader sense of minerals and metals, and for some a 500% increase, especially those like cobalt, like nickel, like copper, that flow into those green energy products. And what you hear a lot is the industry talking about, we need recycled materials, of course, and we are also very much in favor of moving towards a circular economy. But we also know that with this major steep increase in demand of minerals and metals, and the current supply and the projections of supply that we will be able to generate of recycled minerals and metals, there's still a steep curve increase in mines, in virgin mines. Metals, and we know that behind some of these metals are large groups of artisanal miners. In total, I think it's about 40 million or so at the moment, and it is especially these people that could benefit so much from being part of this transition to a green economy if we make it inclusive. And there's a lot of often negative connotation with mining and small-scale mining. At the same time, if you do it well and properly, and if we as an industry are willing to engage and invest in what these people need to make it responsible, to make it safe, and yeah, to make it really generate a good income, yeah, then this can really be a motor, a catalyzer for sustainable local development. And I think we have the responsibility to make that happen, especially for this group. And that is why we are engaging in artisanal mining.
Can I just ask a follow-up question? What have you had to put in place to make this engagement possible for you and to manage the risks better?
Well, we're still working on that. It's not that we already have everything in place and we're done. We're in the middle of developing that. So, for example, on gold, we were the first smartphone company to integrate fair trade gold in our supply chain. What we had to do for that was work 1.5 years, 2 years with our supply chain, and also with fair trade to build a model that was suitable for electronics, because it only existed for jewelry and not yet for electronics. And still there are question marks about the current model, how we would like to set it up, if that is good enough for the certification bodies, etc. So we're still working on that. The cobalt, we had to set up because there was no supply of fair ASM cobalt. So we had to set up the Fair Cobalt Alliance together with a large cobalt supplier, together with large off-takers like Tesla, like Google, and work really on starting to identify mines, support legalization if necessary, and then start to invest in from stripping, from making sure that there are no dangerous tunnels and really work on the ground with NGOs, of course, and with a local experts that have the expertise to support these SMEs, because they are SMEs, corporations, to become better at management, at providing safety for the workers, etc.
Thanks, Monique. It's a lot of different things that need to be done, isn't it? Yeah. It might be a bit intimidating for certain businesses, I think, to do, but I think you've shown that, again, it brings up that principle of partnership, doesn't it, and innovation and so on. But
it does.
Mark, let's think about governments. I know that you're involved in a couple of panels in the UK with the British government. So what do you think governments should expect of SMEs who may have low capacity to truly embed ESG and sustainability into their business processes? What can be reasonably expected of them in terms of using leverage to improve ESG performance in their supply chains? And is there a particular attitude or help that they need to be able to do this?
I think as an SME, it's a fantastic time to be out there as a company. Big corporates and governments are under huge pressure from everybody to show that they are doing something right. And SMEs are, by definition, much more nimble. So it's the classic kind of oil tanker changing direction issue. So I sit on 2 government panels. One is helping the Treasury think about how they spend more money with SMEs, which they are doing an unbelievably great job at. So they have written into all government contracts with things called Prime. So Prime is a government counterparty, so a big corporate that they spend over 100 million quid with. And in those contracts, they have to spend 33% of their total spend has to be with an SME. So by definition, these big corporates are capacity building with these small guys. They are putting money into SMEs because, I mean, people think, okay, building an aircraft carrier, where does the SME come into them? Well, there are loads of little SMEs that come in, because there's a guy who cleans all the windows. There's a guy who is cleaning the decks. There are lots of little SMEs that are involved, and they can, and they are. The government is desperately trying to encourage or forcing big corporates to spend more money with SMEs. So it's a wonderful time to be an SME. On the second panel I sit on, which is a net zero panel. So how are all big corporates that contract the government going to get to net zero. On their own, they have absolutely no chance. They need SMEs to come in and be agile and then help them scale. So they will bring, an SME will bring some really cool innovation. Like, have you seen this amazing new solar panel I've just created in my little shed at the bottom of my garden? And then you go to a big corporate, and the big corporate then goes, okay, well, let me help you scale it. And that is absolutely what is happening on a daily basis. The big corporate they actually have now all got on board. The Ministry of Justice is now on board. Every one of these big government departments is forcing their supply chain to look at how do they work with SMEs, how do they work with SMEs that are very focused around sustainable supply chains, ESG, and are layering that into their contract. So it's a very exciting time to be in an SME that has a strong ESG focus, because you will 100%, you've got an open door from the government's perspective.
That's massive, isn't it? Because it kind of creates real greater economic stability for SMEs, because it by pushing large businesses to have to engage, they have to build the processes, management systems, and know-how for doing that, facilitating them to continue to work with SMEs even where they're not obliged to. So yeah, another example of where governments are a really important part of this, and we must get a principle on them. Now, David, a big issue with SMEs is, of course, human capital and the capacity to do things more sustainably. You have a supply chain sustainability school, which I really want to know more about.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thanks,
Yeah,
Estelle.
do tell us.
Indeed, yeah, and picking up on Mark's point as well, he's absolutely right about the SMEs and their ability to make real change and impact real change, because quite often they understand their local area, of course, better than any remote firm would. So we used to have some fantastic relationships with SMEs in terms of delivering apprenticeships, for example, because they had a really clear link to skill bases, a really clear link to their local areas. And as a top level client, when I was a supply chain director, we couldn't have delivered our own ESG ambitions, if you like, unless our SMEs had helped us to specifically deliver that themselves. So global issues, but with a regional impact, I think was how we used to see that. But yeah, the Supply Chain Sustainability School, fantastic initiative. It's actually 10 years old now, believe it or not. It surprises me when I realized it was started in 2012. I was one of the original board directors for the school, and it primarily started in the construction industry and the infrastructure, but it started to spread out to right across the built environment. And of course, that affects most of our world in one way or another, whether we're the owner or the user of those assets, or whether we're trying to serve them in a supply chain sense. Started out with 7 partners in the construction industry, but now across just about every sector of the economy, it's got over 120 partners now, and those partners, if you like, are the folks that want to drive forward and upskill sustainability levels of knowledge across their industries, and that brings together clients, partners, public sector organizations, suppliers, right across all those different sectors and industries. In fact, in 2013, it did win the Chartered Institute of Purchasing and Supplies Top Initiative Award that year. It was because it was so different, it was so unusual. It existed simply to upskill an industry. And in an unusual sense, it brought together competitors who might otherwise be very reluctant to work together, to specifically do that, to work together, to share their combined knowledge and create collateral and information that would help to skill the supply chains. And particularly picking up the point about SMEs, they tend not to have a sustainability department. They tend not to have anyone beyond the job of getting their services, their goods out of the door. And of course, they're fairly short on time. They're certainly short on resource as well. So this was a chance to offer a free resource when the school is completely free to sign up to and use the resources. It was a chance to do that whenever that fitted the day. So you could do it, after hours, in a half-hour slot between something else. So you didn't have to physically go somewhere. The school was almost exclusively virtual, so you had a chance to be carbon friendly and tap into those resources. But it created over time, and it's built up over this 10 years, a mass of multi-channel resources, videos, webinars, slideshows, collateral, PDFs, all sorts of things. And being free to join, the point is that any SME or any company can join, sign up, create an account for free, do their own assessment. And the purpose of the school in the end was to be focused around action. So the idea is that you can do your own self-assessment and give yourself a score on what you think you know about in terms of ESG, and to uncover some of the blind spots you don't know so much about, and think, I've heard about modern slavery, but I don't really know what it means or what my responsibilities are, or I've heard about a particularly clear focus here, and I don't know what that really means in terms of carbon. This enables you to delve into that and train yourself and teach yourself, and then reassess over time, having taken a journey of upskilling, if you will. So there's that emphasis on learning and action. That's what the school exists to do. And today you can cover topics as broad as the environment and the climate, social value, all areas around sort of fairness, inclusion, respect, ethics, lean opportunities, operational efficiency, change management, innovation. So you can see that over that decade, if you like, the school has built into a phenomenal free resource that SMEs and anyone else can sign up to and start their learning journey.
Will you do me a favour and pop the website for that in the chat for our audience? Thanks so much.
I will.
We're going to move to our question and answer session from the audience. We have one question from Joe Salter. Hello, Joe. It's lovely that you can join us. Brilliant. And in fact, Joe's question sits under one of the other question areas that I had on disclosure and accountability. So before I come to it, I'm just going to read out principles 8 and 9. So principle 8, in a sustainable supply chain, companies are transparent with businesses clearly, promptly, and regularly reporting their sustainability performance at the group site and product level to all stakeholders. Big ask. Principle 9, in sustainable supply chains, companies are truthful and trusted, able to disclose and learn from things when they go wrong and when there are surprises, and they're committed to remedy. So I'd like to ask Joe's question and see if any of you would like to have a go at it. She asks, what do you see the role of accreditations such as fair trade and B Corp as in verifying transparent or ethical supply chains? So what's the role of accreditations like fair trade and B Corp for verifying transparent ethical supply chains? Mark, please go ahead.
It's a great question. As an ex-bank, I'm pretty cynical about these things. But I think it's really, really, really important to have independent verification. It's not great that I sit here and say, guess what, my business is eco. That is not how it should be. It should be that we go out to an independent certification body who then goes, we think you are, and you pass a certain level. If we're a B Corp, it is a phenomenally difficult thing to achieve, and it takes a ridiculous amount of time. But once you kind of get there, it's a kite mark worth having. But I think the principle is, it's really important for corporates to have independent verification that they are actually doing what they're doing. And certainly from a government perspective, you cannot certify or you cannot claim that you are anywhere without having an independent verification saying that you actually have started the journey, you have got a plan, and you are going to be getting to net zero. So I agree that there needs to be independent verification is critical, so provided it's a good kite mark.
So what about radical transparency as an alternative, Mark? What about where if companies decide or don't want to take on the burden that comes with getting audited and the verification process, it's a big investment to do that. Is the alternative radical transparency, where you just communicate openly and freely on what's going right and what's going wrong, and you leave yourselves accountable to civil society, to the media, to others to do that verification on your behalf and write about it? Is that an alternative, or does that give you shivers? And I guess that question's for everyone.
I don't think we're there yet. I think we will get to a point where civil society will know exactly who the good players are and who the bad players are. I think we will get there, but right now there's so many people saying, "Oh, I'm this and I'm that," and it's not. I don't think there's enough trust in the system yet. It's a bit like carbon offsetting. Is it a good thing? Yes. Do we trust the system? No. So there's a way to go before we can get to that point. Hopefully we get to there where people go, these guys are a great company, you can trust them and believe in them, and there is total transparency.
Yeah, and I would like to add that I think it actually goes hand in hand, because hey, you do want to, I think, work towards transparency and full radical transparency, at least in the sense of that we don't do things not because they will form a high risk, or because we don't have the solution yet. And that is what you unfortunately still see too often. The real hardcore risk approach or risk avoidance, where we tend to neglect or look away of all those things that are happening in our supply chain, simply because we don't know, we don't have the solution, and we can't change it overnight, and we know that we will make some errors. So I think there it is key to, as an industry, also tell each other and the media that it is okay to not be perfect at once, but that you do bring your customer and your public along on that journey, and you show how you improve, and showing how you improve still comes with certain claims, right? With certain impact claims that you do need to have verified, I think, because otherwise anyone can say that they are improving or doing good stuff. So I think it goes hand in hand. It is a bit of a paradigm shift, though.
Yeah, so we need both.
David. Yeah, and I would just add, just to build exactly as Monique says, to be verified, to be proven. And I was interested to note when the Edelman Trust Barometer came out this year in January, it was suggesting that 60%, so almost 2 out of 3 people, now have an instinct to distrust something until they see evidence to prove that it's trustworthy. So we've moved into an era, I think, particularly in an era of fake news and what have you, of being guilty until proven innocent. And so it's that proof, that trust, that a badge, if you like, or something that people feel they can trust. But of course, trust is such a fragile thing, isn't it? And one person's trust is not necessarily the same for another person. So I think that is part of what makes it so complex, and part of what that brings us right back to where you were saying, but that need for transparency, the need for reality. And if you look at things like the Science-Based Targets Initiative, of course, there's been a 95% growth in the last 9 months in organizations committing to a science-based target. But committing to it, one thing, of course, but of course, it still then has to be verified on the other side. So I think that commitment and verification, if you like, is that 2-step process now that we're starting to see. Whereas earning a badge, if you like, or earning a certification is just the start of it. You need to keep it. You need to demonstrate that you're up to it, and you need to move with it as it changes too.
Okay, thank you. Look, we're nearly at time, and so I just want to ask Mark one final question before we move to our poll. And that's because I think it would be wrong to end the session without speaking about inspiration. I think it's fair to say that all 3 of our panelists have been inspiring us today, and their organizations are doing quite groundbreaking and inspiring things to drive change in supply chains. But Mark, you've got more to say about this. You've just published a book of interviews with inspiring people in the sustainability world. Do you want to tell us a bit about your book and what you learned from speaking to these people and how to build sustainable supply chains?
But go back to my point about lots of broken toes and kissing lots of frogs. We cannot change kind of the direction of travel with climate change without working together. We absolutely need to collaborate. We need to go and find great people who are doing amazing things. And being an entrepreneur is hard. Running an SME is hard. So I decided last year I'm going to go and interview people that I thought were cool. And actually, they're all on Instagram Live. So collaborate to zero on our website, delphiseco.com. All of the Instagram Live interviews are there. And then I took all of those interviews and dropped them down into kind of the essence of what they are. And I've interviewed the director of sustainability from Cambridge. I interviewed John Elkington, who was one of the founders of B Corp movement. I've interviewed Nigel Topping, who was the climate change exec for COP26. And they're all of the kind of the essence of their inspiration is in this little notebook. So it's actually a notebook, as well as you kind of turn the pages, you then get a little vignette of something that's inspirational. But the most important thing for me was, having been on this journey for over a decade, it's really important to work with great people and to learn from great people. And I kind of tried to get their stories and put it into something that's really simple. But there's the long form live interviews are on Instagram, and then there's obviously this little summary, which I was handing out at COP to all the delegates, going, please read these inspirations and make the right decisions. So
awesome, I love that. Mark, maybe you could also pop a link or the name of the book into the chat for our audience. So audience, it's now time for your fingers to get busy. If you wouldn't mind launching the poll, we want to know from you what principles you'd like us to dive more deeply into either in a future webinar or in perhaps a blog series. There's 7 here and you can pick 2, please. So I can't see them yet on my screen. I'm hoping that.
I think the poll launches at the end of the webinar, I think. So I think that's.
Oh, so we don't do it right now, and I can't get the results and feedback to people. Oh, shame! I wanted to.
No, yeah.
Well, in which case we've got a couple of minutes for a final question, and well, maybe I just will give the floor to all of you and just ask if there's one key message you'd love our audience to hear about how to make their supply chains more sustainable. What would that key message be?
Can I jump in? And as I say, I'm wearing 2 hats as I think that, one as a Chief Sustainability Officer and one as a Supply Chain Director. And I think I was always most disappointed, if you like, in days where people viewed the supply chain as a battlefield. And I was most heartened and most engaged and most uplifted. And I came home thinking what a great day that was, where people actually saw it as an opportunity field. Somewhere where people genuinely, there are complexities and difficulties, but if you genuinely wanted to transform an experience, a company, an industry, a country, and that might sound aspirational, but if you saw it as transformational and a chance to work together, those were the best days really. But seeing it as transactional, battlefield, beating each other over the head over price, no one's going to get anywhere like that.
Thanks, David. Monique, Mark, do you have something to share?
I fully concur with that. And yeah, for me, it is about, I hope we can more and more as an industry move from a single focus on risk management to impact management. And I think that's really using our demand, the market demand, our demand in the supply chain to drive positive change. And it requires a different kind of glasses, you said, a different kind of assessment you do on your suppliers and who you work with and how you select them. But it can have an incredible impact.
Thanks, Monique. Mark?
The thing that inspired me the most, I kind of decamped up to Glasgow for 2 weeks with no agenda other than to just hang around and see who was there and hopefully meet inspiring people. And the thing that struck me the most was every single person, whether you were an old granny or a kid or a hedge fund or a government member, everybody was behind one theme, and it's how on earth do we make this a better place? And it was so interesting that you've got millions and millions and millions of stakeholders that usually challenge all sorts of different stakeholder principles. They were all united behind one. So I came away from COP hugely positive that everybody now knows what they need to do and everybody wants to do this. And I think collaborating with great partners is going to get us there really, really quickly. And yes, we can compete, in our mainstay, but around the kind of getting things done piece, everybody wants to get it done.
Brilliant. I mean, I was thinking the same, Monique, about the impact versus risk piece. That's the bit I'm always pushing as well. And I think all 3 of you have given us so much food for thought today. I'm really grateful that you chose to give us this time and share your experience. So thanks to David Pixon of Alchemists, to Monique Lempers of Fairphone, and to Mark Jankovic of Delphus Eco. And thank you also to Ellis Rains of Alchemists, who has taken us very well through the tech and made sure we didn't have any major issues. And finally, to Karen Sutton of the Global Good Awards for being a very inspiring individual with an inspiring set of awards that hopefully can showcase some of the excellence and the efforts that wonderful businesses are making to drive change. Please do check it out, go and apply. And I really look forward to hearing from anybody that wants to know more about the principles and maybe start adopting them. Have a lovely day.
Thanks,
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.